committee members fairly shortly after the store opened, I think 2014.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. And was a wonderful writer of many kinds of books. I love her first two books, which are called Body, if I'm remembering correctly, Body is Water, and
An explanation.
Explanation for Chaos. Right. Couldn't the words up in my head. But she's an old friend of an old friend of mine, and so I've known about her for a long time. This is the third book in a trilogy about a man named Jason Fittger, who is a professor of creative writing at I guess the nicest way to say it is a lesser than university than where he'd like to be. He's written 5 novels, all of which are out of print, and he has a wonderful, unusual sense of humor and outrage, I guess, in equal measure. Julie teaches and has taught for many years at the University of Minnesota in their creative writing program. She's a Regents professor at the university. If I were one of her friends in the Department of English and I shared an office with her, I feel as if I would never say a word because she has an unusual capability of an ear for fatuous speech, let's put it that way, which is sort of seems to be an academic specialty. So what will happen is Julie will read a slightly attenuated part of the first part of the new book, Age Experience. We have all 3 books here. This book's getting, at the moment, a little hard to find. It's the middle book. They're all hilarious, as I said in the newsletter last week. The thing that I love most about this is it caught me off guard how moving it was. It's so that you get to know these people. They start to feel like friends, and then you realize, oh, that person's more complicated than I thought he was, in a really good way. So that Julie will read, and then you can ask questions, or I may throw a question which, and then she's happy to sign and chat after that. So again, thank you all for coming. This means a lot to us.
Thanks so much. Stand at the full stand here. Let's get up that way. Yeah, I'm going to read most of the first chapter, which is pretty short. So, and if anybody has questions or wants to debate anything at all, I'm happy to do that. Thanks so much for having me at this store. This is a great little place, and I got to go to House on the Rock.
Oh, wow.
Tomorrow I'm going to Taliesin, so on the way to Milwaukee. So, okay, this is chapter 1. Jason Fittger, chair of the Department of English at Payne University, found himself summoned in mid-December to the office of the new provost. The job of provost was to create and then disseminate bad news, so he expected her to announce a new punitive measure to be inflicted on his academic unit, which had scarcely survived the crises of the previous years. Instead, after arranging her features into a facsimile of cordial goodwill, she claimed to be presenting him with an opportunity, truly a plum. Fittger braced himself, preparing to hear it. You're probably familiar with our experience abroad programs, the provost said. Yes, he was familiar with them. He had in fact argued against their existence, first because of the shortage of faculty willing and able to teach internationally, and second because of the absurd and gratuitous colon between the words experience and abroad. The provost, adhering to the serpentine rhetorical style of the university's upper administration, offered some prefatory remarks about the challenging times that Payne had endured, and about the tenacity and community spirit that had allowed the university, a shining beacon of higher learning, to prevail. Fittger retied the shoelace and waited. I'm inviting you to teach the Experience England class this coming January term in London, she said, leaning back in her leather chair. The January term at Payne began in less than 3 weeks, and Fittger hadn't yet graded his essays from the fall. He told the provost he wasn't interested. She seemed not to have heard him. Like all the experience abroad classes, the England seminar, she explained, was interdisciplinary in nature, involving cultural studies, art, religion, history, government, and, of course, literature. But once he took the course over for himself, he would be free to tweak the curriculum if he chose. The program was based in a lovely neighborhood on the fringes of London, with day trips to Oxford, Stonehenge, and Bath. If she were able to make the trip herself, she would jump at the chance. This was, in essence, a 3-week salaried vacation, not to mention an escape from pain and its weather during the worst of the winter. She certainly envied him. There's no need for envy, I'm not available, Victor said. Really, what made him say that? Provost smiled. What made him say it? Well, it was true. First, there were various university tasks, most of which had their origin in her office that he had to take care of, and there were spring semester classes to prepare, and theoretically a few meager days for his own vacation, sure to be punctuated by as yet unforeseen emergencies that invariably cropped up over the course of any holiday. Besides, were department chairs with their Kafkaesque workloads truly the best candidates for... The provost waved these objections away. Easy enough to bring his departmental tasks with him. He could probably take care of them on a plane. It was almost 2013, and there was a little invention you might have heard of. It was called the personal computer. She leaned toward him over the immaculate expanse of her desk, and Ficker was reminded of a python flexing its coils in preparation for an assault on its prey. She wasn't talking about sending him to Cedar Rapids, for God's sake. This was London. Theaters, museums, the changing of the guard, high tea with scones and jam, the Queen. Everyone loved London. Jason Ficker did not love London. The last time he had been there was at least a decade earlier with his then wife Janet, and his primary memories of the trip involved a sodden cylinder of blood pudding, an evening of poorly timed sex, and rain. Surely there were Anglophiles somewhere on a paying campus, members of the faculty endowed with resources beyond a vague hostility to all things British, who might be willing, if not eager, to teach such a class. What about Ravenel and theater? No, the provost had already asked her. Sheffield in sociology? Also a no. Ruiz, Allington? No and no. Ideally, the course would be taught by the faculty member who had proposed it, Randy Lorimer, in history. But the provost paused. There were complications. Complications, as Ficker and everyone else on the Payne campus knew, involved Lorimer being removed from his office in a straitjacket the week before, probably driven around the bend by the paperwork and regulations associated with taking a group of undergrads abroad. The provost looked at her watch. The students had paid their fees, she said. The tickets were purchased, the housing and schedule and coursework arranged. To be blunt, Payne was not prepared to refund or lose the money. And what else did he have to do over the winter break? While the other faculty she had approached had family and holiday commitments, Ficker, she happened to know, was childless and divorced and, in curmudgeonly fashion, had long lived alone. Perhaps more to the point, she would be reviewing his department's budget request at the end of next month. How did he feel about the possibility of receiving or never again receiving assistance or protection of any kind from her office? Ficker took a deep breath and looked down at the carpet. Near his left foot, some sort of insect, a variety of ant or small beetle, was traversing the thread-like fibers, plunging down to the polyester forest floor, and laboriously scrambling up again. Does this class have a syllabus? He asked. Of course it did. Every class at Payne had a syllabus. The provost would have her assistant send it to him, along with a packet of information, including profiles of the students, all of whom had been carefully vetted. Travel and other logistics had been arranged. Was his passport current? Good. It was settled. They stood. On the flat of the desk between them, Ficker saw a slip of paper with a list of names, all of them crossed out, except his own, at the bottom. The provost wished him a pleasant trip. Ficker was, per the provost's description, childless and divorced, but he didn't live entirely alone. He and his ex-wife, Janet Mathias, co-owned a dog, trading him back and forth like a surly intermediary between their two homes. A mutt of uncertain lineage, Rogaine was a threadbare, unappealing creature. Victor had misgivings about his character and disposition and suspected that Rogaine's feelings toward him were the same. Now, sitting in Janet's kitchen with a worn leash dangling from his hand, he explained that due to the provost's opinion of him as a friendless recluse, he would be unavailable for canine care for 3 weeks, from January 1st to the start of spring term. "What are you making, by the way?" he asked. The room smelled of onions and garlic. "Vegetarian goulash, with a side of poached chicken for Rogaine." Janet wiped her hands on her apron, and plucking a pen from a container that was labeled pens, she consulted the large paper calendar on her closet door. A paper calendar, Victor thought, was a lovely nostalgic touch in the kitchen. On Janet's version, the dog custody days were clearly marked. He watched her revise her January schedule. She frowned. "He's got a veterinary appointment on the 15th. I took him last time, so this one's your turn." Vicar looked at the dog, sitting between them on the floor and licking its genitals. "I suppose we could trade. Would you be able to?" No trading. "I'll call and reschedule him," Janet said. "So you can take him when you get back. He's supposed to have his teeth cleaned, and he needs his shots. He should also have his anal sacs milked." "Excuse me?" "Don't pretend you don't know about it," she said. "That's why he scoops his ass along the rug." "Intriguing. Soup to nuts it is, then," Victor said. He hated taking the dog to the vet. Normally a brazen, hubristic beast, Rogaine behaved like a demented coward as soon as they walked through the door. He thought about asking Janet to be more flexible in regard to this taking of turns, but remembered that inflexibility was one of his ex-wife's more dependable traits. It was fairly insulting, the way I was asked to teach the class. He poked the dog's left hindquarter with his toe, and Rogaine responded with a half-hearted snarl, as if I were the last person on campus to be considered. Janet opened the refrigerator and burrowed through the crisper drawers. "You probably were the last person." "I do have 30 years of teaching experience," he said, directing his comments to the back of her neck. She turned around, an odd-looking vegetable in her fist. "And you think that's a qualification?" "What do you mean?" He was distracted by the vegetable, a sort of well-coiffed cauliflower that appeared to be ready for a night on the town. "Why wouldn't it be a qualification?" "Because," she tossed the vegetable into the sink, "teaching abroad is totally different from teaching on campus. You're hardly nurturing." "I need to be nurturing." "You'll be with the students all day," she said. "You don't typically like students, and you're a difficult person. You don't know how to have conversations. I'm sure I've said this before. You're not well socialized. You lack personal skills." That's a flattering little sketch. He watched her savage the odd-looking vegetable with the knife. "What on earth is that thing you're dissecting?" "Romanesco. You don't even relate to the dog very well." "The dog has a damaged personality," Victor said. "He has a romantic attachment to the arm of my couch. And you know I hate the word relatable." Janet pointed out that she had used the word relate and not relatable, and there were plenty of words that, for reasons of his own, she did not want to hear him explain, he seemed to dislike. She lobbed pieces of vegetable into the pot on the stove and turned toward him. "Jay, you don't like England, and you're a terrible traveler. Why would you agree to teach a class about traveling in England?" "Well, the focus isn't specifically travel. I'm not sure what it is. Why do you say I'm a terrible traveler?" "I won't even bother to answer that," Janet said. "You're 63 years old. You've been teaching the same 4 or 5 classes for the past 20 years, and you usually dedicate your January term to lying on the couch complaining that you don't have time to get your writing done." This seemed unfair. Of course he was short on time. He was chairing a department. And why had she referenced his age? She was obviously getting older too, though he had to admit that her regular tennis games, as well as a recent, somewhat annoying interest in wellness, appeared to keep her in very good shape. I don't think you appreciate how much work is involved with running an academic unit. You haven't had the... Oh, sweetheart, Janet said. Vicar startled. His ex-wife didn't care for endearments or sentimentality. During the early years of their marriage, he had given her an anniversary card and found it 10 minutes later, torn in half in the trash. But she was talking not to Vicar, but to Rogaine, who was butting the backs of her knees with his rock-like skull. Vicar watched as she lowered her face toward the dogs. Are you asking for a snack before you go? Is that what you want? A snack is always welcome, Vicar said, speaking for himself as well as the dog. We're not in a rush, though. That smells very good, by the way, that vegetable stew, with or without chicken. Janet ignored him and returned to the stove, both Vicar and Rogaine observing her closely, competing suitors temporarily aligned. Because Janet enjoyed gossip about the higher-ups at Payne, he told her about his meeting with the new provost in more lurid detail, describing the blood-red color of her fingernails and the oversized photo of the Payne mascot, a prairie dog with miniature forelimbs that occupied one of her office walls. He shared his hope that, due to his willingness to serve as an academic chaperone in England, the administration would be indebted to English. Janet set a bowl of sliced chicken on the floor for the dog. The meat was gone in 3 seconds. It must be more than a dozen years since you and I were in England, Vicar said. Do you remember that horrid hotel room we had in London? That sooty little place with the shared bath? I've worked hard to erase that entire trip from my memory, Janet said. Understandable, Vicar nodded. We had that flat tire in the middle of nowhere in the Wessex Downs. And there was that unfortunate afternoon, no one's fault, of course, with the roadside sheep. But we weren't miserable the entire time, were we? The Cotswolds were pleasant, I think. I believe the word you used to describe our weekend in the Cotswolds was harrowing. Janet filled the dog's water bowl and watched him drink. We nearly killed each other in a town called Lower Slaughter. And there was that problem with the laxatives you thought were aspirin. Yes, I'd forgotten about that, he murmured. Rogaine looked back and forth between them. Vicar often had the impression that the dog was privately evaluating, critiquing their discussions. Why did we choose England? He asked. 10 or 15 years back, or whenever it was, why didn't we go to Provence or Norway or Greece, for God's sake? We went to England, Janet said, pulling a bottle of red wine from a rack over the sink, because you promised that if you sold your novel, we would take a trip. We'd go to Europe. But once you sold it, the advance was smaller than you thought it should be, so instead of celebrating, you decided to sulk, and by the time you pulled your head out of your ass, the fares had gone up, and England was the only place we could afford. Vicar had to admire her level of recall. She demonstrated a particular gift for recollection when it came to his blunders and miscalculations, each of which had served as a grain of sand in the hourglass of their divorce. Well, we should have gone to Greece, he said. But of course it's never too late. One day you might... I did go to Greece, actually. A few weeks after the divorce, I went by myself. She pulled the cork from the bottle. 10 days on Crete. It was a glorious, perfect vacation. He watched her inhale the wine scent. She closed her eyes, perhaps indulging in visions of whitewashed sunshine, azure water, and the sinewy arms of the libidinous Greek millionaire. She set the bottle and half a dozen glasses on the counter and looked at the clock. Okay, it's time for you to get out of here. Goodbye. My tennis group will be here at 6. Janet was a member of many groups. Vicar didn't bother to ask her why a tennis group would be gathering for a vegetarian repast rather than for tennis. This was just the sort of question that his ex-wife disliked. You'll bring him back tomorrow afternoon, she asked, looking fondly at the dog. He nodded and clipped the leash to the animal's collar, then put on his gloves and coat and hat. It was nearly a 2-mile walk between his house and Janet's. She asked him if he had a poop bag. No, he did not. He often forgot them. She gave him one. How many students are you taking with you? She asked. Have you met them? 11. And no, I'm sure they've all gone home by now for the break. But I do have a file of their letters and applications, everything from fingerprints to DNA tests. Janet opened the door. Winter was a long and demanding season at Payne, with one variety of snow on top of another. The yellow light of her kitchen spilled onto the wall. Whitaker felt like a soon-to-be exile, about to be shipped off to the tundra without a ration of vegetable stew. At least it's just winter term and not a full semester, he said, as Rogaine tugged at the leash. What can happen in 3 weeks? I don't know, Janet said, but I guess you'll find out. So that's the end of the first You know, the next chapter, which I won't read, is it consists entirely of the undergrad students' statements of interest. So, you know, they have to explain why they want to go on a trip. One of them thinks he's applying to go to the Caribbean. He's somehow applied for the wrong program. One of them refuses to fill out the form entirely. You know, the students have. It was great fun to make these really weirdly exaggerated versions.
They are, but they seem absolutely plausible in an odd way. And I love the young woman who asked that her complicated boyfriend could be removed from.
Yeah, he be removed, and he asks to be always in her group if possible. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I really, you know, as you. And then Julie uses the device of them. Ficker makes them write a paper for every event or every day, and you read a lot of, you know, you're privy to a lot of the papers, and you just start, your heart just goes out to these kids.
They tend to overshare.
Yeah, they're big
Things that are
oversharers.
not necessarily academic. Yeah.
You know, everything is so critical. It's just, and the art student twins are really fabulous. I mean, they're just.
I know. Originally I had more undergrads. I thought, okay, you should take 16, 18 students because that would financially make more sense for the school.
Yeah.
But it was too many people. I couldn't keep track of them all. And, so 2 of them I turned into identical twins. Made them art students. So that sort of collapsed.
Who did the drawings?
A good friend of mine he's an art teacher.
Oh, really good.
I said to him, I can't draw at all, and I said, I have 2 characters who, instead of writing their assignments, are always drawing things and handing them. Could you draw a couple things? And he spent weeks drawing these things. They were incredible. He was disappointed when he saw them in the books. They're only about this big in the book, but they were, large.
Rated. Yeah, you
He
should.
said, couldn't they have made them? I said, well, the book is this big. They had to shrink it. But,
They'd be worth, getting copies and printing, selling the pictures. They're beautiful. The etching and the drawings. But you know what I love in that first, there's so many things in that first chapter that are great, but one of my favorite moments in the whole book, and when you started to read it, I had to bite my finger from laughing out loud, is when he notices the bug in the rug.
The carpet.
And watching the bug move up and down in the carpet. It's just exactly the sort of weird thing that happens when you're uncomfortable.
Trying not to think about what you're.
Yeah, I just love that. God. Okay, are there questions? And I think if you've read either of the other books, feel free to ask questions. If you don't know about the first book is a kind of a miracle. Oh, I forgot to mention that. She was the first woman ever awarded the Thurber Prize for humor for her first book in this trilogy, which is basically 240 pages of letters of recommendation, which makes it sound like something you'd rather cut your arm off than read. And it's one of the funniest books I've ever read in my life. So, anyway, fire away.
When I knew that you were going to be here for the English experience, we got it from the library, and I started reading it, and I was so intrigued. A lot of it was because I lived in England, and my daughter lived in London, and I was going to get all this experience that I had lived through. And then my husband said, well, it's the last one of the trilogy. And well, I got to read the first one. So I finished the Dear Committee Leaders, I can't talk about that one, today, and it's so good. And I'm thinking, since he's a professor of creative writing and you are too, was that like a memoir for you, how you had these letters? And I actually had to look up a lot of the words, because they
I
were.
did too. That's
Oh, you
not
did
my
too?
vocabulary. Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was hilarious. And then, without giving anything away, the touching and poignant stories of some of the students that you shared. I mean, it really made it real and hilarious. And so, Shakespeare Requirement, it was so well done. I'm so glad that we got to meet you.
Thanks.
Really, really good.
Yeah, that one started as an exercise. I was assigning, I walk into the undergrad classroom and I think, okay, what are we gonna write today? Make them write all the time.
Mhm.
And I said, people kept saying they were stuck, they didn't know, they were supposed to be writing a short story. And I said, well, why don't you think about a form first? Usually, you think about a character first or a plot idea. And I said, no, think about a shape. If you know about American presidents, is there something you could do, or a list of recipes, or a series of emails between friends? Is there a way you could turn that format into a story? And they kept saying, I don't get it. What would your form be?
As I said, you wrote a book.
And I said, the form I really know well is a letter of reference. I write them all the time. And, I always thought they were kind of bizarre because, even if you have a student who was like a nice person but squeaked out of class with a C+, you're still going to write a nice letter. You would say John was, a very earnest student. He attended class faithfully. He never would read a bad letter. People would just say, "I'm sorry, I can't write you a letter." You almost never see a negative letter. So they're just so full of these effusive,
It's just
over the top. And I thought, I could create a character who would just blow
maybe
that
in the
form
stories
over.
with his, ex-wife and all these people he used to know, and as the more you got into it, it's more like you really knew these characters and wanting to find out what happened with them. So it's really, really I've been just raving about it to
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
So now
Well,
I know.
this one I feel like is sort of stylistically a bookend to that one because I wanted the middle one, Shakespeare Requirement, sort of focuses most on faculty, the crazy faculty he deals with.
Okay.
Yeah. But there's one undergrad who's having a hard time, a young woman who's having a hard time, and so she's involved. But then I thought in the last one, no, the students have to be front and center in here. So I wanted their writing to be in it as opposed to his writing.
Oh, I see.
Their committee members. Yes.
So I'm halfway through Dear Committee Members. Started there. And two things. One is more of a comment, but a testament to your writing is, so I'm reading these letters of recommendation, but I want to know, did so-and-so get the job? Did they get in? I mean, I really, I guess that speaks to how much your writing really, because I really,
You worry about these
did
poor
they, I
kids.
know, I'm worried about these kids. I'm
Keep
going, did they
worrying,
get the
keep
job?
worrying.
Did they get in? Whatever. But I do have a question, and there are no dumb or silly questions. But this is the question I have as I read it.
Sure.
So you're reading, this is a letter of recommendation to, Mrs. Susan Smith at 123 South whatever Avenue. Every time I read those, I wonder, are those real places? Have you just made those addresses up? How did you make them up?
Yeah.
I mean, did you look, like if he's writing to somebody in New York, is there really a street? That's just,
Yeah.
I don't know why
I spent like a couple of
fixated on
days
that.
looking up zip codes and stuff at the end. It's like, a lot of the places are made up. I would just say Smithville, Oregon, okay. And then I'd look, but I have to find a zip code in Oregon somewhere so that Smithville might be in that place. And sometimes I used scrambled addresses from people I knew. I needed so many names in that book. I cannibalized. There's a ballot. This isn't a spoiler in any way. There's a ballot toward the end of the book. I just needed a whole lot of names of people who were running for something on this ballot. And I took all my brothers-in-law and these nephews. I just took the first name off of one, the last one, and I put them all in there.
Oh.
Because I just thought, I need more names. Where am I going to get even more names? So that was a sort of editorial detail I did at the very end. I had placeholders, blank street, blank city, and then I went back and just filled them in. Yeah. Yeah, I did use a couple of addresses of friends of mine.
Well, Lakewood,
Why not?
Minnesota, that's a real.
Yeah, there were,
Yeah,
Maplewood
friends
was,
that live there, yeah.
is a real place, so I had to look up that address, yeah. And I think one was the Federal Wildlife Service.
Right.
Yeah, that's a real thing, so I had to find there.
The PSs and PPSs, which is so.
And the
That was one, I
vocabulary.
wish I could have underlined, but it was a library book. I should have written it because it was so funny.
Well, and the vocabulary that he has, I wanted him to have this incredibly inflated way of
What?
speaking that would not, and so I wrote that book with a thesaurus next to
It's
me.
like, how did you find the words?
Yeah, because I would think, okay, he's not gonna say blue, what's he gonna say? Where's blue in the thesaurus? Here's a weird word.
Okay,
So I just gave him
very good.
lots
Very
of words
good.
that, again, I had to look up.
Now, this was, you
Pronounce.
won an award for the first.
The first one.
Okay.
When I read the first two books, I wondered if you have yourself had any experience teaching in a small college.
I taught all over the place. I was
Yeah.
telling James earlier, we moved to Minnesota when my spouse got a job there in political science 34 years ago. And for about 10 years I worked part-time, and my kids were small and I stayed home part-time, and I taught everywhere in the Twin Cities.
Mhm.
I taught at St. Kate's, St. Thomas, Augsburg, St. Olaf. If there was a small school, I taught there. I taught a lot at night, just trying to piece things together.
Yeah.
And then I got hired at the U 10 years in. After I published a couple of books, I could see that I won my way in there. But I like a small school, I like a small school. The U is so huge. But I have been teaching, I thought to myself, how do I get to Europe for free? I'll teach it, I'll devise a travel writing class in creative writing. So we didn't have, English classes took people to London and to, Shakespeare sites and such, but we didn't have writing classes that took people abroad, and I thought, I could teach a travel writing class. And I'd been to Spain a bunch of times, but I thought I could get kids. So I've been bringing students, first I did it over January term, a 3-week term, which was too long. We got to Madrid and the dorm was suddenly not available, which we thought it would be. So we just stayed in this hotel, like the first 8 days. I guess three Kings Day is a big deal in Spain. So everything was shut, everything was closed, and they just ran rampant around the city. Well, I made long calls to the university saying, hey, we don't have a classroom, we don't have a dorm. So then I said, okay, we've got to move this. It's 1 week, and I take them spring break week and go to Spain.
So you've done it.
Yes, I've done it several times, but I
Yeah.
wanted to divorce it from, the real life experiences I had with my students, so I moved out to England.
So, have you been to London then?
Yeah, my spouse, he does British and American politics and political science, so he taught 1 term at Oxford.
Oh, wow.
And so I went along, and that was my research. I would, say, we need to go to Bath.
Wasn't it
We need to go to.
marvelous? Yeah, we've been to all those places.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
Mm.
So that allowed me to kind of separate it. There was one tiny real life incident that I barely mentioned in here that happened on one of the trips. I tell the undergrads, no drug policy. This is how you're safe in another country. You have to pack light, sensible shoes. All the women wear spike heels.
Of course.
I tell them about sensible shoes. So we get to the Minneapolis airport, and we're about to go through the security line, and I hear the security guys shouting, "Ma'am, is this your daughter?" And I'm thinking, "It's not my daughter, it's my student." Well, she's in a little trouble. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she brought drugs. I talked to him about this, blah, blah, blah. No, she had a taser.
Oh, jeez.
And she's weeping. She said, "Oh, I didn't know if I would be safe over there. He told us we had to be safe, so I brought a taser." And it hadn't occurred to me to say, "Don't bring any weapons."
Yeah.
You know, but she'd barely been on a plane before getting out of the US, and she was really nervous. And, you know, and then the girl behind her says, "I have mace, is that allowed?" Yeah, we haven't even gone to the airport yet. It's already starting. Something bizarre happens, so. Yes.
So are you leaving the door open for Jay and Janet at the end there with that last student's really late right in the
Spoiler,
second?
spoiler.
No spoilers.
Well, I'm.
Not trying not.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's always a point. I feel like a book is more interesting if you have some question about the character and what will happen to him or her at the end. I mean, that was true with your committee members. A lot of
Right.
those students,
Yeah.
I think, you know, yeah, hopefully you wonder, oh, what happened to that one or this one? At first, I thought a lot about killing him off, because I thought I really need to be done with Shakespeare, you know, and that would be one sure way I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. So, in the middle of the book, I kept thinking, kill him, no, kill him.
You know, Doug Adams had a 4-book trilogy, so.
A 4-book trilogy.
Yeah, Douglas Adams.
Is that right?
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the
I only
Galaxy.
read the Hitchhiker. I didn't
4-book
read
trilogy,
any of this,
yeah.
Huh.
That's a nice
As he calls it.
Yeah.
It's a-
Four-book
But full disclosure, I have not read any of the books yet. I have them all though.
Oh, that's so nice.
Because my son was reading, he was telling me about the English experience, and he said he was on the bus in Chicago, literally laughing out loud. And, you know, making a spectacle of himself, because he just thought it was so fabulous. So.
Good. Yeah, I feel like, I mean, there are sad moments, I think, in Dear Committee Members. There's, you know, that's the one I won a humor award for, and it's kind of a sad book in some ways, but,
Oh, yes, a bag.
humor goes hand
It's a
in hand
bag.
with, yeah. the
In his
sadness.
curmudgeonly way.
Yeah. And I wanted to, you know, I want to humanize him. He can be a real jerk. Victor can be cantankerous. He's a pain in the tail. But, and I don't know, in every book I feel like he's trying.
At some point I was
Working on
trying,
it, yeah.
so you did make it very, you make him very.
I think that's right. I mean, you never fully dismiss, you know, he tugs you back, just like many complicated people do.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're kind of demanding, but once you know that about them, you
Yeah.
treat them, you know, you respond differently sometimes. To
Yeah, the person who's a problem is more interesting in fiction than, you know, just an all-around nice person. There's not much to do with an all-around nice. I mean, you want those people in your life, but on a page, you know, they can't do a whole lot. It's better to have somebody with flaws.
Sometime you should track down Richard Nelson's wonderful play, Some Americans Abroad, which is about 4 professors and their students
Oh,
in
really?
England, in London.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I directed it a lot of years ago. It's very funny and sort of aching, you know, it just kind of makes you cringe. But there were some times when I was reading this where I just thought, yeah, I mean, clearly you've traveled with students and you know, it just, gosh, it's so hard. And what his wife says to him before he goes is, you know, you don't do very well with students, and you
Very
don't.
well.
Yeah.
And it is a whole different thing.
Yeah.
I've done it several times now. You know, you're used to going in, you're with students for an hour, maybe they come to your office to ask you a question, but to be with them, you know, at dinner, at breakfast, you know, they knock on the door, and they don't feel well at 11. What? Read that.
Or if, I don't want to give anything, but you know, one of them tends to travel on its own in this book.
Well, that was a way of also reducing my number of characters.
Now that I heard you said that, I
One
thought
is
that's a good
always
idea.
leaving, and so you don't see him much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would be terrifying of you. Because you would assume that he has parents and they're expecting him to behave himself.
One would think, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just you let me know when it's time to
Oh.
cut me off and let these people
Oh, I think
go on with their lives.
This can go all night, I don't So,
Julie, did you have a favorite student? I have a soft spot for Wyatt.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, Zana sort of became a favorite. She's, I mean, they're all difficult in their own ways. Yeah, Wyatt, you do get to see the arc of some of these students' lives. You find out maybe more than you do in Dear Committee members about some, resolution that happens to some of them later. You get some information. I didn't really want to leave them all. I wanted some info about what happens to them later. But they're still so young, Even Brent and Sonia, the star-crossed lovers. I have a lot of affection for them. Brent is by far the least skilled writer in the group. He says early on, I hope we are not going to do any writing in this class. But, he's particularly appalled when Victor said 500 words a day. Everybody's writing 500 words a day, which, again, was something I have always assigned every time we go. You're going to write every single day. And so, every day? It's a writing class.
but he gets better.
Pardon me?
He gets better.
Yeah, his
Yeah.
writing gets a little better.
Yeah.
A little bit. Transformation.
No, I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
it's not gonna.
He writes 500 words, just not the right
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
This will be fun.
Yeah, the spellings and the malapropisms and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other
Anything else?
questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much.
so much.